OpenAI has made a major change for developers when they're developing AI agents, how they're going to be essentially making these things more effective. So today on the podcast, I want to break down everything happening with this new update. This recently, they made a tweet about this a couple days ago over on Twitter. So some really, really interesting new developments that I think are going to have some big impacts on when we're actually getting these autonomous agents that everyone is talking about. So let's dive into it. Before we get into it, I wanted to say today's episode is sponsored by my very own podcasting course. If you are looking to set yourself apart in your industry, stand out, and kind of elevate your personal brand or your business, I believe that a podcast is the number one way to do it. Obviously, I'm biased because you're listening to this on a podcast right now, but I will say that this podcast I started is the best. I think it's probably the best financial and time commitment or investment I've ever made into my own businesses and my personal brand. And I think that everyone should start a podcast. Again, I know I'm biased on this, but I truly believe, I've been able to get over 4 million downloads on my podcasts. I've gotten thousands of customers for my software products and have been able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, all thanks to my podcast. So I highly recommend anyone do it. If you're interested in getting started on a podcast, I recommend you take my podcast course. I've been podcasting for 5 years. And my goal really was to make something that you can essentially skip all the mistakes, and there is plenty that I made over the last 5 years, and get straight into how to create a really successful podcast or grow your existing podcast. How I was able to get 4 million downloads, how I was able to create a podcast that would get people in the door and help find customers. So if this is something you're interested in, I highly recommend checking out this new podcast course I've launched. Let's get into the episode today. So the big news here is that OpenAI essentially is making it easier for developers to improve how AI assistants, or it's kind of, they're calling them assistants, or it's kind of like the first step, they say, to AI agents, these autonomous AIs that can go around and do things without us. So they're making it easier to implement for developers to implement how these AI assistants find and use information from files. They've made some updates to their API. This is going to help assistants give better answers. The update that they've just done essentially is letting developers have more control over the results that the AI selects, which is going to make it more accurate and also more useful, the responses that it gives. This is something that a lot of people are very excited about. I want to break down some of the implications of this. But first of all, some of the responses. So Simon Wilson over on X, he said, "This looks like a big deal. I've been mostly ignoring OpenAI's RAG offering so far because without details of how it works, chunky strategy, relevance mechanisms, etc., it wouldn't make informed decisions about how to effectively build with it. That seemed fixed with these changes." So the actual tweet that they put out, it's over on the it's at OpenAI devs. It's the OpenAI developers X handle. It says, "We just rolled out technical controls for file search in the Assistants API to help improve the relevance of the assistant's responses. You can now inspect the search results returned by the tools and configure their rankings." So what does this actually mean for the tools that we are all going to get and we're all going to be able to be actually able to use? I think really the big thing here is that these are essentially designed to help these AI assistants get better results. That's the bottom line. Developers, they're now able to essentially adjust these AI agents, how they select information, how that they're using to generate responses. They're able to determine how that's done, especially with files. So, right, like you imagine like files on your computer, these AI agents going to the files on your computer and grabbing something. Essentially, it's easier to actually do that. And this is really interesting because right up until now, we've done a lot of these AI agents or kind of bots or assistants or whatever. They're going to websites, right? They're searching the internet. They're finding some information for you. They're returning it. They're doing things. We're getting to a really interesting point where all of a sudden these agents are going to start actually doing actions on our device. They're grabbing files. They're moving things around. It's going to be a lot more in depth than just web-based. And I think it's interesting because we're seeing this from like a computer perspective, right? Like this agent could go to your computer, could open up a file, grab a PDF out of it, share it with some other location. That's interesting. Or like you can imagine if there was some sort of agent that helped with video editing, it could like know the right folder to go to get video clips for something. So like that's a very interesting concept. But I think we're going to be seeing this also in a big way very soon with Apple's Apple Intelligence, where it's going to be grabbing files and doing things on your actual phone. So we're seeing this on the desktop. We're seeing this on phone. We've already been seeing this like with web for a while. all of these things are going to start getting tied together, and these AI agents are going to be like living and moving around and doing things on our actual devices, which I just find so fascinating. So essentially the new feature, it's just going to let developers inspect file search results and modify the ranker's behavior to make sure that there's relevant results are being prioritized. This like whole assistance API thing, this was launched back in November of 2023. So last year, OpenAI said that this was, quote, a small step towards creating a fully autonomous AI agents. So they're acknowledging like this really is kind of this API is like really how we're going to get there. And they just said like, this is a small step. We're going to make a bunch of improvements. So this is one of the big improvements that they have rolled out. So the API essentially is going to allow developers to use OpenAI's models with specific instructions and integrations. And they're going to be able to integrate other OpenAI ecosystem tools as well, right? So you can imagine you're going to be able to grab OpenAI's voice model, start sticking that in, probably eventually OpenAI's video generation model, Sora, start attaching that to this. So everything's going to be able to branch out of this kind of assistance API where it's going to integrate with all of OpenAI's AI tools. So it's going to be able to generate images, video, text, audio, talk with you, do the visuals to be able to see stuff and get context from that. A lot of really interesting things, and it all gets tied together in this API. So really, what's another interesting thing about this is that this whole assistance feature of OpenAI was created, and they created this whole API so that it can actually interact with other agents, right? So you could have one agent, maybe in charge of your, and like, sure, I'm speculating here, right? So like, don't sue me. This isn't immediately available, but you could have one agent that is your lawyer and one agent that is your accountant. More likely, you could have agents that are like helping your lawyer, helping your accountant do things, right? Like maybe you have a lawyer and they're able to get all like your legal documents from it or something. In any case, you have these different agents actually working together, and so this API is helping to tie all your different agents together so they can all work together, which I think is so fascinating. There's a ton of really interesting new tech that's also come out as far as like these agents go and how this work. I just recently kind of covered one of the really interesting companies that's creating like essentially bank accounts for these agents. So obviously you need a human to own a bank account, but they're helping to make like a programmatic way of you could have different agents and you can give them different budgets for different projects they're working on. You give them actual bank accounts or credit cards. It's not just coming out of like a big fund for the whole company or department. And they have to, say everything that they've used their expenses on. It's like very transparent. You're able to see when, what, why, and which agent, right? So you might have like 7 like accounting agents or 7 like customer support agents, and some of them might be spending money on different things. You want to know who's spending money. It assigns values, and it assigns ID numbers to every agent, and so you can know like who's spending money on what and what they're doing. There's all these really fascinating things that are happening with agents right now, and I think this is a big area to watch. So as OpenAI keeps making these, sometimes it might seem like small changes to this assistance program, this is where you want to watch, because this is what a lot of these agents are going to be coming out of. OpenAI obviously is the biggest, and developers are going to be using what comes down the line from this. So I think initially OpenAI described this API as enabling assistants that still require guidance. So that's why they're calling them assistants and not actually agents, because these are not things that are fully autonomous, but it is a step towards kind of having these more independent AI applications, I think. So far, like I mentioned, developers have responded really positively to the update. Some are saying like they're thrilled. This is going to help them to essentially better tune their assistants. McKay Wrigley said, "One of my biggest wants." Nick Dubes said, "This is very intriguing. Will GPTs get in-app options to control this too? Would be very nice to modify." A lot of people seem to be quite excited about a lot of the features that are being developed. So right now, AI agents, I believe, are really going to take over a lot of tasks that have minimal input. So you can think of things like booking flights or automating data processing for large companies. Companies like Google, Salesforce, they're already working on different agent platforms. Google has Oscar, which is becoming open source. And then Salesforce has been releasing a bunch of enterprise-specific agents lately. So a lot of these big companies are working on this. OpenAI is not the only one. AI agents right now, I think really they're in their early stages. There's a lot of room for improvement, specifically in kind of accuracy, which is where we're hoping that this new feature, there's file search controls that OpenAI just released to their API. Hopefully that comes into play to help make that better. Benchmark tests on these different AI agents currently, I don't think have a lot of comprehensive metrics to really evaluate how well these agents are, right? We have a lot of benchmarking platforms for just determining how good ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini versus Llama are, right? So we have these benchmark kind of arenas or whatever where you can test the models, but really there's not a very solid version of that for AI agents, right? So it's hard to know what's going to be the best, but this is no doubt going to be a very big area and something that's going to be very popular in the future. People testing how well agents do at different tasks. So overall, very, very excited. And every update I think that OpenAI does is definitely bringing us closer to having your own agent, or maybe you'll have an agent on your team at work that is in charge of specific tasks, running around doing things. It's going to be a fascinating future. So I'll keep you up to date on everything that happens in this case. Thanks so much for tuning into the podcast today. Hope you learned something new about AI agents and what is going on in the field. If you're interested in starting your own podcast, there's a link in my show notes. It will be the best podcast course you ever take in your entire life. I can promise you that. And I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.